The first interview of Dr. Jamisson Neruda. By Sarah.
What follows is a session I recorded of Dr. Neruda on December 27, 1997. He gave permission for me to record his answers to my questions. This was the first of 5 interviews that I was able to tape record before he left or disappeared. I have preserved these transcripts precisely as they occurred. No editing was performed, and I've tried my best to include the exact words and grammar used by Dr. Neruda. Are you comfortable?
Yes, I'm fine and ready to begin when you are.
You've made some remarkable claims with respect to the Ancient Arrow project. Can you please recount what your involvement in this project was and why you chose to leave it of your own free will?
I was selected to lead the decoding and translation of the symbol pictures found at the site. I have a known expertise in languages and ancient texts. I am able to speak over 30 different languages fluently and another 12 or so languages that are officially extinct. Because of my skills in linguistics and my abilities to decode symbol pictures like petroglyphs or hieroglyphs, I was chosen for this task. I had been involved in the Ancient Arrow project from its very inception, when the ACO took over the project from the NSA. I was initially involved in the site discovery and its restoration along with a team of 7 other scientists from the ACO. We restored each of the 23 chambers of the Wingmakers time capsule and catalogued all of their attendant artifacts. As the restoration was completed, I became increasingly focused on decoding their peculiar language and designing the translation indexes to English. It was a particularly vexing process because an optical disc was found in the 23rd chamber, which was initially impregnable to our technologies. We assumed that the optical disc held most of the information that the Wingmakers desired us to know about them. However, we couldn't figure out how to apply the symbol pictures found in their chamber paintings to unlock the disc. I decided to leave the project after I was successful in deducing the access code for the optical disc, and felt that the ACO was going to prevent the public from accessing the information contained within the Ancient Arrow site. There were other reasons, but it's too complicated to explain in a concise response.
What did 15 do when he found out you were leaving?
He never had a chance to respond directly to me because I left without a word. But I'm certain that he's angry and feels betrayed.
Tell me about 15. What's he like?
15 is a genius of unparalleled intelligence and knowledge. He's the leader of the Labyrinth Group and has been since its inception in 1963. He was only 22 years old when he joined the ACO in 1956. I think he was discovered early enough before he had a chance to establish a reputation in academic circles. He was a renegade genius who wanted to build computers that would be powerful enough to time travel. Can you imagine how a goal like that in the mid-1950s must have sounded to his professors? Needless to say, he was not taken seriously, and was essentially told to get in line with academic protocols and perform serious research. 15 came to the ACO through an alliance it had with Bell Labs. Somehow Bell Labs heard about his genius and hired him, but he quickly outpaced their research agenda and wanted to apply his vision of time travel.
Why was he so interested in time travel?
No one is absolutely sure. And his reasons may have changed over time. The accepted purpose was to develop blank slate technology or BST. BST is a form of time travel that enables the rewrite of history at what are called intervention points. Intervention points are the causal energy centers that create a major event like the breakup of the Soviet Union or the NASA space program. BST is the most advanced technology and clearly anyone who is in possession of BST can defend themselves against any aggressor. It is, as 15 was fond of saying, the freedom key. Remember that the ACO was the primary interface with extraterrestrial technologies and how to adapt them into mainstream society as well as military applications. We were exposed to ET. And knew of their agenda. Some of these ET scared the hell out of the ACO.
Why?
There were agreements between our government, specifically the NSA, to cooperate with an ET species commonly called the Greys in exchange for their cooperation to stay hidden and conduct their biological experiments under the cloak of secrecy. There was also a bungled technology transfer program, but that's another story. However, not all the Greys were operating within a unified agenda. There were certain groups of Greys that looked upon humans in much the same way as we look upon laboratory animals. They're abducting humans and animals, and have been for the past 48 years. They're essentially conducting biological experiments to determine how their genetics can be made to be compatible with human and animal genetic structure. Their interests are not entirely understood, but if you accept their stated agenda, it's to perpetuate their species. Their species is nearing extinction and they're fearful that their biological system lacks the emotional development to harness their technological prowess in a responsible manner. 15 was approached by the Greys in his role at the ASIO, and they desired to provide a full-scale technology transfer program, but 15 turned them down. He had already established a TTP with the core team, and felt that the Greys were too fractured organizationally to make good on their promises. Furthermore, the Cortium technology was superior in most regards to the Greys. With the possible exception of the Greys' memory implant and their genetic hybridization technologies. However, 15 and the entire Labyrinth Group carefully considered an alliance with the Greys if for no other reason than to have direct communication with regard to their stated agenda. 15 liked to be in the know. So eventually we did establish an alliance, which consisted of a modest information exchange between us. We provided them with access to our information systems relative to genetic populations and their unique predisposition across a variety of criteria including mental, emotional, and physical behaviors, and they provided us with their genetic findings. The Greys, and most extraterrestrials for that matter, communicate with humans exclusively through a form of telepathy, which we called suggestive telepathy because to us it seemed that the Greys communicated in such a way that they were trying to lead a conversation to a particular end. In other words, they always had an agenda, and we were never certain if we were a pawn of their agenda or we arrived at conclusions that were indeed our own. I think that's why 15 didn't trust the Greys. He felt they used communication to manipulate outcomes to their own best interest in favor of shared interests. And because of this lack of trust, 15 refused to form any alliance or TTP that was comprehensive or integral to our operations at either the ASIO or the Labyrinth Group.
Did the Greys know of the existence of the Labyrinth Group?
I don't believe so. They were generally convinced that humans were not clever enough to cloak their agendas. Our analysis was that the Greys had invasive technologies that gave them a false sense of security as to their enemies' weaknesses. And I'm not saying that we were enemies, but we never trusted them. And this they undoubtedly knew. They also knew that the ASIO had technologies and intellects that were superior to the mainstream human population, and they had a modicum of respect, perhaps even fear of our abilities. However, we never showed them any of our pure state technologies or engaged them in deep dialogues concerning cosmology or new physics. They were clearly interested in our information databases and this was their primary agenda with respect to the ASIO. 15 was the primary interface with the Greys because they sensed a comparable intellect in him. The Greys looked at 15 as the equivalent of our planet's CEO.
How did 15 become the leader of both the ASIO and the Labyrinth Group?
He was the director of research in 1958 when the Cortium first became known to the ASIO. In this position, he was the logical choice to assess their technology and determine its value to the ASIO. The Cortium instantly took a liking to him, and one of 15's first decisions was to utilize the Cortium Intelligence Accelerator technologies on himself. After about 3 months of experimentation, most of which was not in his briefing reports to the then current executive director of the ASIO, 15 became infused with a massive vision of how to create BST. The executive director was frightened by the intensity of 15's BST agenda and felt that it would divert too much of the ASIO's resources to a technology development program that was dubious. 15 was enough of a renegade that he enlisted the help of the Cortium to establish the Labyrinth Group. The Cortium were equally interested in BST for similar reasons as 15. The Freedom Key, as it was sometimes called, was established as the prime agenda of the Labyrinth Group, and the Cortium and 15 were its initial members. Over the next several years, 15 selected the cream of the crop from the scientific core of the ASIO to undergo a similar intelligence accelerator program as he had, with the intention of developing a group of scientists that could in cooperation with the Cortium successfully invent BST. The ASIO, in the opinion of 15, was too controlled by the NSA. And he felt the NSA was too immature in its leadership to responsibly deploy the technologies that he knew would be developed as an outgrowth of the Labyrinth Group. So 15 essentially plotted to take over the ASIO and was assisted by his new recruits to do so. This happened a few years before I became affiliated with the ASIO as a student and intern. My stepfather was very sympathetic to 15's agenda and was helpful in placing 15 as the executive director of the ASIO. There was a period of instability when this transition occurred, but after about a year, 15 was firmly in control of the agendas of both the ASIO and the Labyrinth Group. What I said earlier. That he was viewed as the CEO of the planet. That's essentially who he is. And of the AT. Who are interacting with humankind, only the Cortium understand the role of 15. He has a vision that is unique in that it is a blueprint for the creation of BST, and is closing in on the right technological and human elements that will make this possible.
What makes BST such an imperative to 15 and the Labyrinth Group?
The ASIO has access to many ancient texts that contain prophecies of the Earth. These have been accumulated over the past several hundred years through our network of secret organizations of which we are a part. These ancient texts are not known in academic institutions, the media, or mainstream society. They are quite powerful in their depictions of the 21st century. 15 was made aware of these texts early on when he became Director of Research for the ASIO, and this knowledge only fueled his desire to develop BST.
What were these prophecies and who made them?
The prophecies were made by a variety of people who are, for the most part, unknown or anonymous, so if I told you their names you would have no recognition. You see, time travel can be accomplished by the soul from an observational level. That is to say, that certain individuals can move in the realm of what we call vertical time and see future events with great clarity, but they are powerless to change them. There are also those individuals who have, in our opinion, come into contact with the Wingmakers and are provided messages about the future, which they had recorded in symbol pictures or extinct languages like Sumerian, Mayan, and Jamisson. The messages or prophecies that they made had several consistent strands or themes that were to occur in the early part of the 21st century, around the year 2011. Chief among these was the infiltration of the major governments of the world, including the United Nations, by an alien race. This alien race was a predator race with extremely sophisticated technologies that enabled them to integrate with the human species. That is to say, they could pose as humanoids, but they were truly a blend of human and android. In other words, they were synthetics. This alien race was prophesied to establish a world government and rule as its executive power. It was to be the ultimate challenge to humankind's collective intelligence and survival. These texts are kept from the public because they are too fear-provoking and would likely result in apocalyptic reprisals and mass paranoia.
Are you saying what I think you're saying? That anonymous prophets from God know where and when, have seen a vision of our future take over by a race of robots? I mean, you do realize how unbelievable that sounds.
Yes. I know it sounds unbelievable. But there are diluted versions of this very same prophecy in our religious texts. It's just that the alien race is portrayed as the Antichrist, as if the alien race was personified in the form of Lucifer. This form of the prophecy was acceptable to the gatekeepers of these texts, and so they allowed a form of the prophecy to be distributed, but the notion of an alien race was eliminated.
Why? And who exactly is it who's censoring what we can read and can't? Are you suggesting there's a secret editorial committee that previews books before their distribution?
This is a very complicated subject and I could spend a whole day just acquainting you with the general structure of this control of information. Most of the world's major libraries have collections of information that are not available to the general public. Only scholars are authorized to review these materials, and usually only on site. In the same way, there are manuscripts that were controversial and posited theories that were sharply different than the accepted belief systems of their day. These manuscripts or writings were banished by a variety of sources, including the Vatican, universities, governments, and various institutions. These writings are sought out by secret organizations that have a mission to collect and retain this information. These organizations are very powerful and well-funded, and they can purchase these original manuscripts for a relatively small amount of money. Most of the writings are believed to be hocus-pocus anyway, so libraries are often very willing to part with them for an endowment or modest contribution. Also, most of these are original writings having never been published, being that they originated from a time before the printing press. There is a network of secret organizations that are loosely connected through the financial markets and their interests in worldly affairs. They are generally centers of power for the monetary systems within their respective countries, and are elitists of the first order. The ASIO is affiliated with this network only because it is rightly construed that the ASIO has the best technology in the world, and this technology can be deployed for financial gain through market manipulation. As for an editorial committee, no, this secret network of organizations doesn't review books before publication. Its holdings are exclusively in ancient manuscripts and religious texts. They have a very strong interest in prophecy because they believe in the concept of vertical time and they have a vested interest in knowing the macro-environmental changes that can affect the economy. You see, for most of them, the only game on this planet that is worth playing is the acquisition of ever-increasing wealth and power through an orchestrated manipulation of the key variables that drive the economic engines of our world.
So if they're so smart about the future, and they believe these prophecies, what are they doing to help protect us from these alien invaders?
They help fund the ASIO. This collective of organizations has enormous wealth. More than most governments can comprehend. The ASIO provides them with the technology to manipulate money markets and rake in hundreds of billions of dollars every year. I don't even know the scope of their collective wealth. The ASIO also receives funding from the sale of its diluted technologies to these organizations for the sake of their own security and protection. We've devised the world's finest security systems, which are both undetectable and impregnable to outside forces like the CIA and the former KGB. The reason they fund the ASIO is that they believe 15 is the most brilliant man alive and they're aware of his general agenda to develop BST. They see this technology as the ultimate safeguard against the prophecy and their ability to retain relative control of the world and national economies. They also know 15's strategic position with alien technologies and hope that between his genius and the alien technologies that the ASIO is assimilating, that BST is possible to develop before the prophecy occurs.
But why the sudden interest in the Wingmakers time capsule? How does it play a role in all of this BST stuff?
Initially, we didn't know what the connection was between the Ancient Arrow project and the BST imperative. You have to understand that the time capsule was a collection of 23 chambers literally carved inside of a canyon wall in the middle of nowhere about 80 miles northeast of Chico Canyon in New Mexico. It is, without a doubt, the most amazing archaeological find of all time. If scientists were allowed to examine this site, with all of its artifacts intact, they would be in awe of this incredible find. Our preliminary assumptions were that this site was a time capsule of sorts left behind by an extraterrestrial race who had visited Earth in the 8th century. But we couldn't understand why the art was so clearly representative of Earth if it were a time capsule. The only logical conclusion was that it represented a future version of humanity. But we weren't certain of this until we figured out how to access the optical disc and translate the first set of documents from the disc. Once we had a clear understanding of how the Wingmakers wanted to be understood, we began to test their claims by analyzing their chamber paintings, poetry, music, philosophy, and artifacts. This analysis made us fairly certain that they were authentic, which meant that they were not only time travelers, but that they were also in possession of a form of BST.
Why did you assume they had BST?
We believed it took them a minimum of 2 months to create their time capsule. This would have required them to open and hold open the window of time and physically operate within the selected time frame. This is a fundamental requirement of BST. Additionally, it is necessary to be able to select the intervention points with precision both in terms of time and space. We believed they had this capability, and they had proven it with their time capsule. Furthermore, the technological artifacts they had left behind were evidence of a technology that was so far in advance to our own that we couldn't even understand them. None of the extraterrestrial races we were aware of had technologies so advanced that we could not probe them, assimilate them, and reverse engineer them. The technologies left behind in the Ancient Arrow site were totally enigmatic and impervious to our probes. We considered them so advanced that they were quite literally indiscernible and unusable, which, though it may sound odd, is a clear sign of an extremely advanced technology.
So you decided that the Wingmakers were in possession of BST? But how did you think you were going to acquire their knowledge?
We didn't know, and to this day, the answer to that question is elusive. The ASIO placed its best resources on this project for more than 2 intensive months. I posited the theory that the time capsule was an encoded communication device. I began to theorize that when one went through the efforts to interact with the various symbol pictures and immerse themselves in the time capsule's art and philosophy, it affected the central nervous system in a way that it improved fluid intelligence. It was, in my opinion, the principal goal of the time capsule to boost fluid intelligence so that BST was not only able to be developed, but also utilized.
You lost me. What is the relationship between BST and fluid intelligence?
BST is a specific form of time travel. Science fiction treats time travel as something that is relatively easy to design and develop, and relatively one-dimensional. Time travel is anything but one-dimensional. As advanced in technology as the Cortium and Greys are, they have yet to produce the equivalent of BST. They are able to time travel in its elemental form, but they can't interact with the time that they travel to. That is to say, they can go back in time, but once there, they cannot alter the events of that time because they are in a passive, observational mode. The Labyrinth Group has conducted 7 time travel experiments over the past 30 years. One clear outcome from these tests is that the person performing the time travel is an integral variable to the technology used to time travel. In other words, the person and the technology need to be precisely matched. The Labyrinth Group, for all it knows, already possesses BST, but lacks the time traveler equivalent of an astronaut who can appropriately finesse the technology in real time and make the split-second adjustments that BST requires. The Labyrinth Group has never seriously considered the human element of BST and how it is integral to the technology itself. There were some of us who were involved in the translation indexes of the Wingmakers, who began to feel that that was the nature of the time capsule, to enhance fluid intelligence and activate new sensory inputs that were critical to the BST experience. What is the relationship between BST and fluid intelligence?
But I still don't understand what it was that led you to that conclusion.
When we had translated the first 30 pages of text from the optical disc, we learned some interesting things about the Wingmakers and their philosophy. Namely, that they claimed that the three-dimensional five-sensory domain that humans have adjusted to, is the reason we are only using a fractional portion of our intelligence. They claimed that the time capsule would be the bridge from the three-dimensional five-sensory domain to the multi-dimensional seven-sensory domain. In my opinion, they were saying that in order to apply BST, the traveler needed to operate from the multi-dimensional seven-sensory domain. Otherwise, BST was the proverbial camel through the eye of the needle. Or in other words, impossible.
This at least seems plausible to me. Why was it so hard to believe for the ASIO?
This initiative was really conducted by the Labyrinth Group and not the ASIO, so I'm making that distinction just to be accurate, and not to be critical of your question. For 15, it was hard to believe that a time capsule could activate or construct a bridge that would lead someone to become a traveler. This seemed like an extraordinarily remote possibility. He felt that the time capsule may hold the technology to enable BST, but he didn't believe it was merely an educational or developmental experience. Also, and more importantly, the true identity of the Wingmakers became clear as we deployed our RV technologies.
First, what are RV technologies?
Think of it as psychic spying. The ASIO has a department that specializes in remote viewing technology, and within this department was a woman of unparalleled capability as an RV. She was assigned to the project as its RV, and she was a critical element in determining the identity and purpose of the Wingmakers.
Can we come back to the RV technology? Just tell me what she discovered as to the identity of the Wingmakers.
She was very attuned to the first artifact we recovered, which turned out to be a homing device that essentially led us to the ancient Arrow site. We conducted two official RV sessions, one that I monitored and another that 15 monitored. She was able to make contact with the original planners of the ancient Arrow site. Through these two RV sessions we were able to determine that the identity of the Wingmakers was the most ancient race of humankind.
When you say most ancient, what do you mean?
We know of them mostly through a few ancient manuscripts that were reputedly channeled by these beings. 3 are a few myths in Mayan and Sumerian text that refer to these beings as well. But the most definitive text comes from the Kotium, who defined them, in our terms, as the central race.
How can they be so ancient if they're so technologically advanced?
The central race resides in the most primeval galaxies nearest the centermost part of the universe. According to Kotium cosmology, the structure of the universe is segmented into 7 superuniverses that each revolve around a central universe. The central universe is the material home of First Source or the Creator. According to the Kotium, in order to govern the material universe, First Source must inhabit materiality and function in the material universe. The central universe is the material home of First Source and is eternal. It's surrounded by dark gravity bodies that make it essentially invisible even to those galaxies that lie closest to its periphery. The Kotium teach that the central universe is stationary and eternal, while the 7 superuniverses are creations of time and revolve around the central universe in a counterclockwise rotation. Surrounding these 7 superuniverses is outer or peripheral space, which is non-physical elementals consisting of non-baryonic matter or antimatter, which rotates around the 7 superuniverses in a clockwise rotation. This vast outer space is expansion room for the superuniverses to expand into. The known universe that your astronomers see is mostly a small fragment of our superuniverse and the expansion space at its outermost periphery. Hubble-based astronomy extrapolates, based on a fractional field of view, that there are 50 billion galaxies in our superuniverse, each containing over 100 billion stars. However, most astronomers remain convinced that our universe is singular. It is not. According to the Kotium, On the fringe of the central universe resides the central race, which contain the original human DNA template of creation. However, they are such an ancient race that they appear to us as gods, when indeed they represent our future selves. Time and space are the only variables of distinction. The central race is known to some as the creator gods who developed the primal template of the human species and then, working in conjunction with the life carriers, seeded the galaxies as the universes expanded. Each of the 7 super-universes has a distinctive purpose and relationship with the central universe via the central race based on how the central race experimented with the DNA to achieve distinct, but compatible physical embodiments to be soul carriers.
I don't even know what to ask next.
The central race is divided into 7 tribes, and they are master geneticists and the progenitors of the humanoid race. In effect, they are our future selves. Quite literally they represent what we will evolve into in time and towards in terms of space.
So, you're saying that the Wingmakers are our future selves and that they're building these time capsules in order to communicate with us?
The Labyrinth Group believe that the Wingmakers are representatives of the central race, and that they created our particular human genotype to become suitable soul carriers in our particular universe. The ancient Arrow site is part of a broader, interconnected system of 7 sites installed on each continent. Together, we believe this system constitutes a defensive technology.
So 3 are 7 ancient Arrow sites?
Yes.
And you know where they are?
I know generally where the remaining 6 are, but I don't know their specific location. They remain undiscovered so far as I know.
Why would the most advanced race or future version of humanity place such a sophisticated array of technologies and artifacts on our planet? What are they afraid of?
They have an ancient, formidable enemy, which 15 calls the Animus.
We're back to the synthetics.
One in the same.
So, the Wingmakers are protecting their human genetics from the invasion of the Animus, and they place these sites or defensive technologies on Earth to somehow prevent them from taking over the planet?
That's essentially what we believe. However, it's more than human DNA. It includes all the higher-order animals, humans being one of a collective of about 120 species.
And you know all of this because of a psychic's vision, a few ancient manuscripts, and the Cortium?
I admit it sounds implausible, but yes, we know all of this from sources that no one in the public domain can access or corroborate.
So the Wingmakers, or Central Race, created us and presumably hundreds of other species, planted us on Earth, and then built a complex defensive system to protect their genetics. Is that the situation?
The best way to conceptualize who these beings are, is to consider them as geneticists who were the firstborn of First Source. The galaxies in which the central race resides are approximately 18 billion years old and their genetics are immeasurably more developed than our own. They are the optimal soul carrier in that they can coexist in the material world and the non-material dimensions simultaneously. This is because their genetic blueprint has been fully activated.
You sound like you're a believer in this philosophy. But I don't understand why you're such an authority if it's the Cortium cosmology. Did they teach you this?
Part of our TTP with the Cortium extended to their cosmology, and they have the equivalent of our Bible called liminal cosmogony that I translated. It was our first detailed exposure to the central race and their behind-the-scenes influence of genetic evolution and transformation.
What do you mean behind the scenes?
The Wingmakers have created a DNA template that is form-fitted to each of the 7 super-universes, enabling a unique and dominant soul carrier to emerge within each of the super-universes. This soul carrier in our case is the human genotype. Within our genetic substrate is the inborn structure that will ultimately deliver our species to the central universe as a perfected species. The Wingmakers have encoded this within our DNA, and set forth the natural and artificial trigger points that cause our genetic structures to alter and adapt. In this process, it activates parts of our nervous system that feed the brain with a much richer stream of data from our 5 senses and 2 additional senses that we have yet to consciously activate.
It sounds a little too manufactured.
What do you mean?
Just that humans will one day aspire to the heights of the Wingmakers, but our salvation is something invisible that's encoded in our genes. It feels like we're manufactured to attain the same view or perspective of our creators. What happened to free will?
You raise a good question, Sarah. I can't defend this system of belief. I can recite any passage you want from the books that I know, but it's just someone's opinion who's taken the time to write it down. I can tell you that in my experience, The wider the range of possibilities as one moves toward more of a multidimensional thought stream and activity path, the narrower one's choices become as they pertain to rightful living. You could even say that free will diminishes as one becomes realized to all possibilities.
I know you're trying to help, but you lost me. But don't try to explain again. Let us just chalk it up to my dense brain getting in the way.
If it's anything, it's my poor explanation. It's difficult to define these things in a way that can enter your consciousness at its preparation point.
You said earlier that the Wingmakers encoded trigger points that were both natural and artificially stimulated. What did you mean?
Again, I want to emphasize that this is all according to the Cortium. We have very little proof of any of this from our own empirical research. However, the Labyrinth Group has a high degree of trust in the Cortium's cosmological systems of belief because of their history as an explorer race, and their superior application of physics. Our human DNA is designed. It did not evolve from forces of time, matter, and energy. It was designed by the central race, and part of this design was to encode within the DNA template certain supersensory capabilities that would enable a human to perceive itself in a very specific way.
In what way?
As a soul carrier that is connected to the universe like a ray of light is connected to a spectrum of colors as it passes through a prism.
Could you be a bit more concrete?
I'm sorry, sometimes I quote passages. It's easier than coming up with my own explanation every time.
No doubt one of the curses of having a photographic memory.
Perhaps you're right. I'll try in my own words. Our DNA is designed to respond to natural imagery, words, tones, music, and other external forces.
What do you mean by respond?
It can activate or deactivate certain components of its structure that enable adaptation in both the biological and higher states of being.
Like?
Like the state of enlightenment as described by some of our planet's spiritual teachers.
I've never heard of enlightenment as something that one adapts to.
That's only because mystics and scientists alike do not understand this aspect of the human DNA template. Everything, whether it's a biological environment or a state of mind, requires adaptation on the part of the person undergoing the experience. Adaptation is the primary intelligence designed within our genetic code, and it is this intelligence that is awakened, or triggered, with certain stimuli. The stimuli can be artificially induced, that is to say, the central race has encoded adaptation to higher vibratory frequencies within our DNA that they can trigger through catalytic images, words, or sounds.
Okay, so now you're coming full circle to the purpose of the artifacts found at the ancient Arrow site. Correct?
I believe they're related. To what extent I'm not sure. But from reading the information contained within the optical disc, I'm quite certain that the Wingmakers intend the music, art, poetry, and philosophy to be catalytic.
But for what purpose?
Let's save that for a later time. I promise we'll get to that, but it's a very long story.
Let's take a short break and resume after we've had a chance to grab some more coffee. Okay?
Okay.
Break for about 10 minutes. Resume interview. During the break I asked you about the network of secret organizations you mentioned that the ASIO is part of. Can you elaborate on this network and what its agenda is?
There are many organizations that have noble exteriors and secret interiors. In other words, they may have external agendas that they promote to their employees, members, and the media, but there is also a secret and well-hidden agenda that only the inner core of the organization is aware of. The outer rings or protective membership as they're sometimes referred to, are simply window dressing to cover up the real agenda of the organization. The IMF, Foreign Relations Committee, NSA, KGB, CIA, World Bank, and the Federal Reserve are all examples of these organizational structures. Their inner core is knitted together to form an elitist, secret society, with its own culture, economy, and communication system. These are the powerful and wealthy who have joined forces in order to manipulate world political, economic, and social systems to facilitate their personal agenda. The agenda, as I know it, is primarily concerned with control of the world economy and its vital resources: oil, gold, gas reserves, platinum, diamonds, etc. This secret network has utilized technology from the ASIO for the purpose of securing control of the world economy. They're well into the process of designing an integrated world economy based on a digital equivalent of paper currency. This infrastructure is in place, but it is taking more time than expected to implement because of the resistance of competitive forces who don't understand the exact nature of this secret network, but intuitively sense its existence. These competitive forces are generally businesses and politicians who are affiliated with the transition to a global, digital economy, but want to have some control of the infrastructure development, and because of their size and position in the marketplace can exert significant influence on this secret network. The only organization that I'm aware of that is entirely independent as to its agenda, and therefore the most powerful or alpha organization, is the Labyrinth Group. And they are in this position because of their pure state technologies and the intellect of its members. All other organizations, whether part of this secret network of organizations or powerful multinational corporations, are not in control of the execution of their agenda. They are essentially locked in a competitive battle.
But if this is all true, then is 15 essentially running this secret network?
No. He's not interested in the agenda of this secret network. He's bored by it. He has no interest in power or money. He's only attracted to the mission of building BST to thwart hostile alien attacks that have been prophesied for 12,000 years. He believes that the only mission worth deploying the Labyrinth Group's considerable intellectual power is the development of the ultimate defensive weapon or freedom key. He's convinced that only the Labyrinth Group has a chance to do this before it's too late. You have to remember that the Labyrinth Group consists of 118 humans and approximately 200 Cortium. The intellectual ability of this group, aligned behind the focused mission of developing BSDB for the alien takeover, is truly a remarkable undertaking that makes the Manhattan Project look like a kindergarten social party in comparison. And perhaps I'm exaggerating a bit for effect. But I'm pointing out that 15 is leading an agenda that is far more critical than anything that has been undertaken in the history of humankind.
So, if 15 is running his own agenda, and it's just as you say it is, why would you defect from such an organization?
The ASIO has a memory implant technology that can effectively eliminate select memories with surgical precision. For example, this technology could eliminate your recall of this interview without disrupting any other memories before or after. You would simply sense some missing time perhaps, but nothing more would be recalled. If that. My intuition cautioned me that I was a candidate to have this procedure because of the behaviors I was exhibiting in deference to the Wingmakers. In other words, I was believed to be a sympathizer of their culture, philosophy, and mission. What I knew of it. That made me a potential risk to the project. The Labyrinth Group, in a very real sense, feared its own membership because of their enormous intellects and ability to be cunning and clever. This imprinted a constant state of paranoia which meant that technology was deployed to help ensure compliance to the agenda of 15. Most of these technologies were invasive, and the members of the Labyrinth Group willingly submitted to the invasion in order to more effectively cope with the paranoia. Several months ago I began to systematically shut down these invasive technologies, in part to see what the reaction of 15 would be, and partly because I was tired of the paranoia. As I was doing this, it became obvious to me that the suspicions were escalating and it was simply a matter of time before they would ask me to subject myself to an MRP.
MRP?
Yes, MRP stands for Memory Restructure Procedure. What I had learned from the Wingmakers time capsule is not something I want to forget. I don't want to give this information up. It has become a central part of what I believe and how I want to live out my life.
Couldn't you have simply defected and not sought out a journalist who will want to get the story out? I mean, couldn't you have simply gone to an island and lived out your life and never disclosed the existence of the Labyrinth Group and the Wingmakers?
You don't understand. The Labyrinth Group is untouchable. They have no fears about what I divulge to the media. Their only concern is the terrible precedence of defection. I'm the first. No one has ever left before. And their fear is that if I defect and get away successfully, others will too. And once that happens, the mission is compromised and BST may never happen. 15 and his directors take their mission very seriously. They are fanatics of the First Order, which is both good and bad. Good in the sense that they're focused and working hard to develop BST, bad in the sense that fanaticism breeds paranoia. My reasons for seeking out a journalist like you and sharing this knowledge is that I don't want the Wingmakers time capsules to be locked away from humanity. I think its contents should be shared. I think that was their purpose.
This will seem like a strange question. But why would the Wingmakers hide their time capsule and then encode its content in such an extraordinarily complex way if they wanted this to be shared with humanity? If the average citizen had found this time capsule, or even a government laboratory, what's the chance they would have been able to decipher it and access the optical disc?
It's not such a strange question actually. We asked it ourselves. It seemed clear to the Labyrinth Group that it had been the chosen organization to unlock the optical disc. To answer your question directly, had the time capsule been discovered by another organization, chances are excellent that its optical disc would never be accessed. Somehow, this coincidence that the time capsule ended up in the hands of the Labyrinth Group seems to be an orchestrated process. And even 15 agreed with that assessment.
So 15 felt that the Wingmakers had selected the Labyrinth Group to decide the fate of the time capsule's content?
Yes.
Then wouldn't it be reasonable to assume that 15 wanted to learn more about the contents of the time capsule before he released it to the public through the NSA? Or some other government agency?
No. It's doubtful that 15 would ever release any information about the Ancient Arrow project to anyone outside of the ASIO. He's not one to share information that he feels is proprietary to the Labyrinth Group, particularly if it has anything to do with BST.
So now that you've made these statements, isn't it going to affect the ASIO? Isn't someone going to ask questions and start poking around looking for answers?
Perhaps. But I know too much about their security systems, and there's no way that a political inquiry will find them. And there's no way the secret network of organizations I mentioned earlier could exert any influence over them. They're completely indebted to the ASIO for technologies that permit them to manipulate economic markets. The ASIO and Labyrinth Group, are, as I said before, untouchable. Their only concern will be defection, the loss of intellectual capital.
What effect will your defection have on the ASIO or the Labyrinth Group?
Very little. Most of my contributions with respect to the time capsule have been completed. There are some other projects having to do with encryption technologies that I developed, and these will be more significant in their impact.
Back to the Wingmakers for a moment. If they're so advanced technologically, why time capsules? Why not just appear one day and announce whatever it is they want to share? Why this game of hide-and-seek and hidden time capsules?
Their motives are not clear. I think they left behind these time capsules as their way to bring culture and technology from their time to ours. We also believe that these sites represent a defensive weapon. A very sophisticated defensive weapon. As for why don't they just show up and give us the information? This, I think, is their genius. They've created 7 time capsules and placed them in various parts of the world. I believe this is all part of a master plan or strategy to engage our intellects and spirits in a way that has never been done before. To demonstrate how art, culture, science, spirituality, how all of these things are connected. I believe they want us to discover this. Not to be told. If they simply arrived here in your living room and announced they were the Wingmakers from the centermost sector of the universe, I suspect you'd be more amazed about their personalities and physical characteristics and what life is like in their world. That's assuming you even believed them. The aspects of what they wanted to impart: culture, art, technology, philosophy, spirituality, these items could get lost in the phenomenon of their presence. Also, in the text that we had translated, it was apparent that the Wingmakers had time-traveled on many occasions. They interacted with people from many different times and called themselves culture bearers. They were probably mistaken as angels or even gods. For all we know, their reference in religious texts may indeed be frequent.
So you think they intend that these time capsules be shared with the whole of humanity?
You mean the Wingmakers?
Yes.
I don't know with absolute certainty. But I think they should be shared. I don't have anything to personally gain from getting this information out to the public. It goes against everything I've been trained for and places me at risk, and at the very least, disrupts my lifestyle irreparably. To me, the Ancient Arrow time capsule is the single greatest discovery in the history of humankind. Discoveries of this magnitude should be in the public domain. They shouldn't be selfishly secured and retained by the ASIO or any other organization.
Then why are these discoveries and the whole situation with ET kept from the public?
The people who have access to this information like the sense of being unique and privileged. That's the psychology of secret organizations and why they flourish. Privileged information is the ambrosia of elitists. It gives them a sense of power, and the human ego loves to feed from the trough of power. They would never confess to this, but the drama of the AT contact and other mysterious or paranormal phenomenon is extremely compelling and of vital interest to anyone who is of a curious nature, particularly politicians and scientists. And by keeping these subjects in private rooms behind closed doors with all the secrecy surrounding it, it creates a sense of drama that is missing in most of their other pursuits. So you see, Sarah, the drama of secrecy is very addictive. Now of course, The reason that they would tell you for keeping this out of the public domain is for purposes of national security, economic stability, and social order. And to some extent, I suppose there's truth to that. But it's not the real reason.
Does our president know about the ET situation?
Yes.
What does he know?
He knows about the Greys. He knows about ET bases that exist on planets within our solar system. He knows about the Martians.
Good God, you're not going to tell me that little green men from Mars actually exist, are you?
If I were to tell you what I know about the ET situation, I'm afraid I would lose my credibility in your eyes. Believe me, the reality of the ET situation is much more complex and dimensional than I have time tonight to report, and if I gave you a superficial rendering, I think you'd find it impossible to believe. So I'm going to tell you partial truths, and I'm going to be very careful in my choice of words. The Martians are a humanoid race fashioned from the same gene pool as we. They live in underground bases within Mars, and their numbers are small. Some have already immigrated to Earth, and with some superficial adjustments to their physical appearance, they could pass for a human in broad daylight. President Clinton is aware of these matters and has considered alternative ways to communicate with ET. To date, a form of telepathy has been used as the primary communication interface. However, this is not a trusted form of communication, especially in the minds of our military personnel. Virtually every radio telescope on the globe has been, at one time or another, used to communicate with ET. This has had mixed results, but there have been successes, and our president is aware of these.
Then is Clinton involved in the secret network you mentioned earlier?
Not knowingly. But he is clearly an important influencer, and is treated with great care by high-level operatives within the network.
So you're saying he's manipulated?
It depends on your definition of manipulation. He can make any decision he desires. Ultimately he has the power to make or influence all decisions relative to national security, economic stability, and social order. But he generally seeks inputs from his advisors. And high-level operatives from this secret network advise his advisors. The network, and its operatives, seldom gets too close to political power because it's in the media fishbowl, and they disdain the scrutiny of the media and the public in general. Clinton, therefore, is not manipulated, but simply advised. The information he receives is sometimes doctored to lead his decisions in the direction that the network feels is most beneficial to all of its members. To the extent that information is doctored, then I think you could say that the president is manipulated. He has precious little time to perform fact-checking and fully evaluate alternative plans, which is why the advisors are so important and influential.
Okay, so he's manipulated at least by my definition. Is this also happening with other governments like Japan and Great Britain, for instance?
Yes, this network is not just national or even global. It extends to other races and species. So its influence is quite broad, as are the influences that impinge upon it. It is a two-way street. As I said before, the Labyrinth Group operates the only agenda that is truly independent, and because of its goal, it's permitted to have this independence. Though in all honesty, there's nothing that anyone could do to prevent it, with the possible exception of the Wingmakers.
So all the world's governments are being manipulated by this secret network of organizations. Who are these organizations? You mentioned some of them, but who are the rest? Is the mob involved?
I could name most of them, but to what end? Most you wouldn't recognize or find any reference to. They're like the Labyrinth Group. Had you ever heard of it before? Of course not. Even the current management of the NSA is not aware of the ASIO. At one time, they were, but that was over 35 years ago, and people circulate out of the organization, yet still retain their alliance to the secret and privileged information network. And no, absolutely there is no mob or organized crime influence in this network. The network uses organized crime as a shield in some instances, but organized crime operates through intimidation, not stealth. Its leaders possess average intelligence and associate with information systems that are obsolete and therefore non-strategic. The organized crime network is a much less sophisticated version of the network I was referring to.
Okay, back to the Wingmakers for a moment. And I apologize for my scattered questions tonight. It's just that there's so much I want to know that I'm finding it very difficult to stay on the subject of the Ancient Arrow project.
You don't need to apologize. I understand how this must sound to you. I'm still wide awake, so you don't have to worry about the time.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about your impressions or insights into the ET situation that you spoke of earlier. To me, this is the part that's most fascinating.
First of all, I want to explain that the AT that interact with our world's governments are not the same ones that interact with the Labyrinth Group.
But I thought you said that the Greys were involved with the ASIO, or at least one of its factions.
Yes. They're also known as deserters, but as I said, there are many different factions of the Greys, and the one that the ASIO is working with are the Alpha faction, and they don't operate with our government organizations because they are too suspicious of them, and frankly, don't view them as intelligent enough to even warrant their time.
What about the core team? What's the Federation? I haven't heard you talk about it before.
The core team are a very sophisticated culture, integrating technology, culture and science in a very holistic manner. For different reasons, they're not involved with our governments either, mainly because of their role with the Federation. Each galaxy has a Federation or loose-knit organization that includes all sentient life forms on every planet within the galaxy. It would be the equivalent of the United Nations of the galaxy. This Federation has both invited members and observational members. Invited members are those species that have managed to behave in a responsible manner as stewards of their planet and combine both the technology, philosophy, and culture that enable them to communicate as a global entity that has a unified agenda. Observational members are species who are fragmented and are still wrestling with one another over land, power, money, culture, and a host of other things that prevent them from forming a unified world government. The human race on planet Earth is such a species, and from now, it is simply observed by the Federation, but is not invited into its policy-making and economic systems.
Are you saying that our galaxy has a form of government and an economic system?
Yes, but if I tell you about this you will lose track of what I really wanted to share with you about the Wingmakers.
I'm sorry for taking us off track again. But this is just too amazing to ignore. If there's a federation of cooperative, intelligent species, why couldn't they take care of these hostile aliens in the year 2011 or at least help us?
The Federation doesn't intrude on a species of any kind. It is truly a facilitating force, not a governing force with a military presence. That is to say, they will observe and help with suggestions, but they will not intervene on our behalf.
Is this like the Prime Directive as it's portrayed on Star Trek?
No. It's more like a parent who wants its children to learn how to fend for themselves so they can become greater contributors to the family.
But wouldn't a hostile takeover of Earth affect the Federation?
Most definitely. But the Federation does not preempt a species' own responsibility for survival and the perpetuation of its genetics. You see, at an atomic level our physical bodies are made quite literally from stars. At a subatomic level, our minds are non-physical repositories of a galactic mind. At a sub-subatomic level, our souls are non-physical repositories of God or the intelligence that pervades the universe. The Federation believes that the human species can defend itself because it is of the stars, galactic mind, and God. If we were unsuccessful, and the hostility spread to other parts of our galaxy, then the Federation would take notice and its members would defend their sovereignty, and this has happened many times. And in this process of defense new technologies arise, new friendships are forged, and new confidence is embedded in the galactic mind. That's why the Federation performs as they do.
Doesn't BST exist somewhere within the Federation?
Perhaps in one of the planets closer to our galactic core.
So why doesn't the Federation help? You said they could help, didn't you?
Yes, they can help. And the core team are IMs or invited members and they are helping us. But they themselves do not possess the BST technology. This is a very special technology that's permitted to be acquired by a species that intends to use it only as a defensive weapon. And herein is the challenge.
Who does the permitting? Are you saying the Federation decides when a species is ready to acquire BST?
No. I think it has to do with God.
I don't know why, but I have a hard time believing that you believe in God.
Well, I do. And furthermore, so does everyone within the Labyrinth Group including 15. We've seen far too many evidences of God or a higher intelligence that we can't dispute its existence. It would be impossible to deny based on what we've observed in our laboratories.
So God decides when we're ready to responsibly use BST. Do you think he'll decide before 2011? I admit there was a tone of sarcasm in this question.
You see, Sarah, the Labyrinth Group is hopeful that the readiness of the entire species isn't the determining factor, but that a subgroup within the species might be allowed to acquire the technology as long as it was able to protect it from all non-approved forces. This subgroup is hoped to be the Labyrinth Group, and it's one of the reasons why 15 has invested so much of the ASIO's resource into security systems.
You didn't really answer my question though. Do you think it can be developed in 12 years?
I don't know. Certainly I hope so, but the ST is not our only line of defense. The Labyrinth Group has devised many defensive weapons, not all of which I'll describe to you. The Animus have visited Earth before, approximately 300 million years ago, but they didn't find anything present on our planet to cause them to invest the time and resources to colonize our planet. When their probes return in 13 years, they will think differently. Our analysis is that they will befriend our governments and utilize the United Nations as an ally. They will set about orchestrating a unified world government through the United Nations. And when the first elections are held in 2018, they will overtake the United Nations and rule as the world government. This will be done through trickery and deception. I mention our analysis taken from 3 different RV sessions because they're quite specific as to the dates, and so we have the equivalent of 19 years to produce and deploy BST. Ideally, yes, we'd like to have it completed in order to interface with the intervention points for this race when it decided to cross over into our galaxy. We would like to cause them to choose a different galaxy or abandon their quest altogether. But it may be impossible to determine this intervention point. You see, the memory implant technology developed by the Labyrinth Group can be utilized in conjunction with BST. We can define the intervention point when our galaxy was selected as a target to colonize, enter that time and place, and impose a new memory on their leadership to divert them from our galaxy.
Either I'm getting tired, or this just got a lot more confusing. You're saying that the Labyrinth Group already has scenarios to nip this thing in the bud? To prevent this marauding group of aliens from even entering our galaxy? How do you know where they are?
To answer your question, I would need to explain with much more granularity the precise nature of BST and how it differs from time travel. I'll try to explain it as simply as I can, but it's complex, and you need to let go of some of your preconceived notions of time and space. You see, time is not exclusively linear as when it's depicted in a timeline. Time is vertical with every moment in existence stacked upon the next and all coinciding with one another. In other words, time is the collective of all moments of all experience simultaneously existing within non-time, which is usually referred to as eternity. Vertical time infers that one can select a moment of experience and use time and space as the portal through which they make their selection real. Once the selection is made, time and space become the continuity factor that changes vertical time into horizontal time or conventional time.
You lost me. How is vertical time different from horizontal time?
Vertical time has to do with the simultaneous experience of all time, and horizontal time has to do with the continuity of time in linear, moment-by-moment experiences.
So you're saying that every experience I've ever had or will ever have exists right now? That the past and future are actually the present, but I'm just too brainwashed to see it?
As I said before, this is a complex subject, and I'm afraid that if I spend the time explaining it to you now, we'll lose track of more important information like BST. Perhaps if I were to explain the nature of BST, most of your questions would be answered in the process.
Okay, then tell me what blank slate technology is? Given the title, I assume it means something like wipe out an event and change the course of history. Right?
Let me try to explain it this way. Time travel can be observational in nature. In this regard, the ASIO and other organizations, even individual citizens, have the ability to time travel. But this form of time travel is passive. It's not equivalent to BST. In order to precisely alter the future, you have to be able to interact with vertical time, paging through it like a book, until you find the precise page or intervention point relevant to your mission. This is where it gets so complex, because to interact with vertical time means you will alter the course of horizontal time. And understanding the alterations and their scope and implication requires extremely complex modeling. This is why the Labyrinth Group aligned itself with the Cortium. Its computing technology has processing capabilities that are about 4,000 times more powerful than our best supercomputers. This enables us to create organic, highly complex scenario models. These models tell us the most probable intervention points once we've gathered the relevant data, and what the most probable outcomes will be if we invoke a specific scenario. Like most complex technologies, BST is a composite technology having 5 discrete and interrelated technologies. The first technology is a specialized form of remote viewing. This is the technology that enables a trained operative to mentally move into vertical time and observe events and even listen to conversations related to an inquiry mode. The operative is invisible to all people within the time they are traveling to, so it's perfectly safe and unobtrusive. The intelligence gained from this technology is used to determine the application of the other four technologies. This is the equivalent of intelligence gathering. The second technology that is key to BST is the equivalent of a memory implant. As I mentioned earlier, the ASIO refers to this technology as a memory restructure procedure or MRP. MRP is the technology that allows a memory to be precisely eliminated in the horizontal time sequence and a new memory inserted in its place. The new memory is welded to the existing memory structure of the recipient. You see, events small and large occur from a single thought, which becomes a persistent memory, which in turn becomes a causal energy center that leads the development and materialization of the thought into reality. Into horizontal time. MRP can remove the initial thought and thereby eliminate the persistent memory that causes events to occur. The third technology consists of defining the intervention point. In every major decision, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of intervention points in horizontal time as a thought unfolds and moves through its development phase. However, in vertical time, there is only one intervention point, or what we sometimes call the causal seed. In other words, if you can access vertical time intelligence, you can identify the intervention point that is the causal seed. This technology identifies the most probable intervention points and ranks their priority. It enables focus of the remaining technologies. The fourth technology is related to the third. It's the scenario modeling technology. This technology helps to assess the various intervention points as to their least invasive ripple effects to the recipients. In other words, which intervention point, if applied to a scenario model, produces the desired outcome with the least disruption to unrelated events. The scenario modeling technology is a key element of BST because without it, BST could cause significant disruption to a society or entire species. The fifth and most puzzling technology is the interactive time travel technology. The Labyrinth Group has the first four technologies in a ready state waiting for the interactive time travel technology to become operational. This technology requires an operative, or a team of operatives, to be able to physically move into vertical time and be inserted in the precise space and time where the optimal intervention point has been determined. From the operatives must perform a successful MRP and return to their original time in order to validate mission success.
I've been listening to this explanation and I think I even understand some of it, but it sounds so surreal to me. Dr. Neruda. I'm at a loss to explain how I'm feeling right now. This is all so strange. It's so big. Enormous. I can't believe this is going on somewhere on the same planet that I live. Before this interview, I was worried about balancing my checkbook and when my damn car would ever be fixed. This is just too strange.
Maybe we should take another break and warm up our coffee.
Signing off for a coffee break. Break for about 15 minutes. Resume interview. If the Labyrinth Group has 4 of the 5 technologies ready to go, and is only awaiting the interactive part, they must have scenario models and intervention points already established for how they plan to deal with this animus race. Do they?
Yes. They have about 40 scenario models and perhaps as many as 8 intervention points defined.
And if 3 are that many, there must be a priority established. What's the most probable scenario model?
I will be brief on this point because it's such classified information that only the SL-14 personnel and 15 know this. My classification is SL-13, and so I get diluted reports and quite possibly misinformation with regard to our scenario modeling. About all I can tell you is that we know from both the prophecies and our remote viewing technology a significant amount of information about this race. For example, we know that it hails from a galaxy that our Hubble telescope has examined as thoroughly as possible and we've charted it as extensively as possible. We know that it's 37 million light-years away and that the species is a synthetic race, a mixture of genetic creation and technology. It possesses a hive mentality, but individual initiative is still appreciated as long as it is aligned with the explicit objectives of its leaders. Because it's a synthetic race, it can be produced in a controlled environment and its population can be increased or decreased depending on the whims of its leaders. It is.
Didn't you just say it's from a galaxy that's 37 million light-years away? I mean, assuming they were able to travel at the speed of light, it would take them 37 million years to come to our planet. And you said earlier that they hadn't even crossed into our galaxy yet, right?
The Cortium come from a planet that is 15 million light-years away, and yet they can come and go between their planet and our planet in the time it takes us to travel to the moon, a mere 250,000 miles away. Time is not linear, nor is space. Space is curved, as your physicists have recently learned, but it can be artificially curved through displacement energy fields that collapse space and the illusion of distance. Light particles do not displace or collapse space, they ride a linear line through space, but there are forms of electromagnetic energy that can modify or collapse space. And this technology makes space travel even between galaxies not only possible, but also relatively easy.
Why did you say, your physicists just then?
I apologize, it's just a part of the conditioning of being isolated from mainstream society. When you operate for 30 years in a secret organization like the Labyrinth Group, you tend to look at your fellow humans as not your fellow humans, but as something else. The principles of science that the Labyrinth Group has embraced are very different from those taught within within our universities. I must be getting tired.
I didn't mean to criticize you. It's just the way you said it, it sounded as though an alien or an outsider said it.
I qualify as an outsider, but certainly not an alien.
Okay, back to this prophecy or alien race. What do they want? I mean, why travel such a far distance to rule Earth?
This seems such a funny question to me. Excuse me for laughing. It's just that humans do not understand how special Earth is. It is truly, as planets are concerned, a special planet. It has such a tremendous biodiversity and a complex range of ecosystems. Its natural resources are unique and plentiful. It's a genetic library that's the equivalent of a galactic zoo. The Animus desire to own this planet in order to own its genetics. As I've already mentioned, this is a synthetic race. A species that can clone itself and fabricate more and more of its population to serve the purpose of its colonization program. However, it desires more than the expansion of its empire. It desires to become a soul carrier, something reserved for pure biological organisms. Synthetic organisms are not able to carry the higher frequencies of soul, which absolutely require an organic nervous system.
So they want a soul?
They want to expand throughout the universe and develop their organic nature through genetic re-engineering. They want to become soul carriers in order to achieve immortality. They also want to prove what they already believe, that they are superior to all other pure organics.
So where are they right now?
The Animus?
Yes.
I assume they remain in their home world. To the best of our knowledge, their probes haven't crossed into our galaxy yet.
And when they arrive, how will the ASIO or Labyrinth Group know?
As I said, the ASIO has already done a significant amount of intelligence gathering and even selected scenarios and intervention points.
So what's the plan?
The most logical approach would be to travel to the time and place when the causal thought was born to explore the Milky Way, and through MRP, expunge it from the memory of the race. Essentially, convince them that of all the wonderful, life-inhabited galaxies, the Milky Way is a poor choice. The Labyrinth Group would implant a memory that would lead this race to conclude that our galaxy was not worthy of their serious exploration.
So some other galaxy becomes their next target? Wouldn't we bear the responsibility of their next conquest? Aren't we then perpetrators ourselves?
This is a fair question, but I'm afraid I don't know how to answer it.
Why couldn't we? Using this MRP technology, simply implant a memory not to be aggressive? To tell this race to stop trying to colonize new worlds that aren't theirs to own like property. Why? We do this?
Perhaps we will. I don't really know what 15 has in mind. I am, though, confident in his approach and its efficacy.
But you said earlier that you feared for your life. That 15 is probably trying to hunt you down even as we speak. Why are you so confident in his sense of morality?
In the case of 15, morality doesn't really play a role. He operates in his own code of ethics, and I don't pretend to understand them all. But I'm quite certain of his mission to avert takeover by this alien race, and I'm equally confident that he will choose the best intervention point with the least influence to the Animus. It's the only way he can acquire BST. And he knows this.
We're back to God again, aren't we?
Yes.
So God and 15 have this all figured out?
There's no certainty if that's what you mean. And there's no alliance between 15 and God, at least not that I'm aware of. This is part of the belief system that the Labyrinth Group formalized along the path to developing BST. It's logical to us that God is all-powerful and all-knowing because it operates as the universal mind field that interpenetrates all life, all time, all space, all energy, and all existence. This consciousness is impartial, but certainly it's in a position to deny things or, perhaps more accurately, delay their acquisition.
If God exists everywhere as you say, then why wouldn't he stop this marauding alien race and keep them in their place?
Again, a fair question, but one that I can't answer. I can only tell you that the God I believe in is, as I said before, impartial. Meaning that it allows its creation to express themselves as they desire. At the highest level where God operates, all things have a purpose. Even aggressive species that desire to dominate other species and planets. It was 15's belief that God orchestrated nothing but understood everything in the universal mind. Remember when I was talking about the galactic mind?
Yes.
There are planetary minds, solar minds, galactic minds, and a singular universal mind. The universal mind is the mind of God. Each galaxy has a collective consciousness or mind field that is the aggregation of all of the species present within that galaxy. The universal mind creates the initial blueprint for each of the galaxies related to its galactic mind or composite consciousness. This initial blueprint creates the predisposition of the genetic code seeded within a galaxy. We, the Labyrinth Group, believe that God designed each galaxy's genetic code with a different set of predispositions or behaviors.
And why would this be so?
So diversity is amplified across the universe, which in turn permits God to experience the broadest continuum of life.
Why is this so important?
Because God loves to experiment and devise new ways of experiencing life in all of its dimensions. This may very well be the purpose of the universe.
You know you're talking like a preacher. You speak like these are certainties or truths that are just self-evident. But they're just beliefs, aren't they?
Yes, they're beliefs, but beliefs are important, don't you think?
I'm not sure. I mean, my beliefs are changing every day. They're not stable or anchored in some deep truth that's constant like bedrock or something.
Well, that's good. I mean that they change. The Labyrinth Group evolved a very specific set of beliefs. Some of these were based on our experiences as a result of the quantum intelligence enhancement technologies, some were based from ancient texts that were studied, and some were borrowed from our ET contacts.
So now you're going to tell me our friendly neighborhood ET are religious zealots?
No. No, I don't mean that they were trying to convert us to their beliefs, we simply asked and they related them to us. Upon hearing them, they seemed quite a bit more like science than religion actually. I think that's the nature of a more evolved species. They finally figure out that science and religion converges into cosmology. That understanding the universe in which we live also causes us to understand ourselves, which is the purpose of religion and science. Or at least should be.
Okay, this is getting a little too philosophical for my tastes. Can we return to a question about the Wingmakers? If, as you say, there's a galactic federation that governs the Milky Way, how do the Wingmakers factor into this federation?
I'm impressed by the nature of your questions. And I wish I could answer them all, but here again, I don't know the answer.
But if you can use your remote viewing technology to eavesdrop on this alien race in an entirely different galaxy, why can't you observe the Federation?
As for the Federation, they're fully aware of our remote viewing capability, and in fact, we can't eavesdrop on the Federation because they're able to detect our presence if we observe them through remote viewing. So, in deference to their privacy and trusting their agenda, we never imposed our technology on the Federation. Perhaps only once or twice.
You'll have to forgive me, Dr. Neruda, but I find all of this a little hard to believe. We've skimmed the surface of about 100 different subjects through the course of this interview, and I keep coming back to the same basic issue. Why? Why would the universe be set up this way and no one on Earth know about it? Why all the secrecy? Does someone think we humans are so stupid that we couldn't understand it? And who the hell is this somebody?
Unfortunately, there are so many conspiracies to keep this vital information out of the public domain, that what ends up in the hands of the public is diluted to the point of uselessness. I can understand your frustration. I can only tell you that there are people who know about these things, but only 15 knows about the larger reality of what we've touched on tonight. In other words, and this is to your point, Sarah, there are some people within the military, government, secret network, NSA, CIA, etc. that know parts of the whole, but they don't understand the whole. They aren't equipped with the knowledge to stand before the media and explain what's happening. They fear that they would be made to appear feeble by the fact that they only know pieces of what's going on. It's like the story of the three blind men who are all touching different parts of an elephant and each thinks it is something different. 15 withholds his knowledge from the media and the general public because he doesn't want to be seen as a savior of humanity, the next messiah. And he especially doesn't want to be seen as some fringe lunatic that should be locked up, or worse yet, assassinated because he is so misunderstood. The instant he stepped forward with what he knows, he would lose his privacy and his ability to discover BST. And this he'll never do. Most people who know about this greater reality are fearful of stepping into the public scrutiny because of the fear of being ridiculed. You have to admit that the general public is frightened by what it doesn't understand, and they do kill a messenger.
But why can't we get even partial truths about this picture of reality? About ET? And the Federation? Someone, the media or government or someone else, is keeping this information from us. Like the story you were telling me about the Martians. If this is true and Clinton knows about this, why aren't we being told?
There's a cynical part of me that would say something like, why do you watch 6 hours of television every day? Why do you feed your minds exclusively with the opinions of others? Why do you trust your politicians? Why do you trust your governments? Why do you support the destruction of your ecosystems and the companies and governments that perpetrate this destruction? You see, because the whole of humanity allows these things to occur, the wool is pulled over your eyes and it's easy to ration information and direct your attention to mundane affairs like the weather and Hollywood.
That's fine for you to say, someone whose it can't be charted. But for those of us with average intelligence, what are we supposed to do differently that will give us access to this information? To this larger reality?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. I don't pretend to have the answers. But somehow humans need to be more demanding of their governments and even the media. Because the media is a big part of this manipulation, though they're not aware of how they've become pawns of the information cover-up. The truth of the matter is that no one entity is to blame. Elitists have always existed since the dawn of man. There have always been those who had more aggression and power and would dominate the weaker of the species. This is the fundamental structure that has bred this condition of information cover-up, and it happens in every sector of society, including religion, government, military, science, academia and business. No one created this playing field to be level and equal for all. It was designed to enable free will and reality selection based on individual preferences. And for those who have the mental capacity to probe into these secrets behind the secrets behind the secrets, they usually find pieces of this larger reality, as you put it. It's not entirely hidden. There are books and individuals and even prophecies that corroborate much of what I've spoken of here tonight. And these are readily available to anyone who wants to understand this larger universe in which we live. So, to answer your question, what are we supposed to do differently? I would read and study. I would invest time learning about this larger universe and turn off the television and disconnect from the media. That's what I would do.
Maybe this is a good place to wrap things up. Unless you have anything else you'd like to add.
Only one thing, and that is that if anyone never reads this interview, please do so with an empty mind. If you bring a mind full of learning and education and opinion, you'll find so much to argue within what I've said that you'll not hear anything. And I'm not interested in arguing with anyone. I'm not even that interested in convincing anyone of what I've said. My life will go on even if no one believes me. The Wingmakers have built a time capsule of their culture and it's magnificent. I wish I could take people to the original site so they could stand before each of the 23 chambers and witness these wall paintings in person. If you were to do this, you would understand that art can be a portal that transports the soul to a different dimension. There is a certain energy that these paintings have that can't be translated in mere photographs. You really need to stand inside these chambers and feel the purposeful nature of this time capsule. I think if I could do that, you would believe what I've said.
Could you take someone like me to the site?
No. Unfortunately, the security system surrounding this site is so sophisticated, the site entrance, for all intents and purposes, is invisible. All I have are my photographs.
You're saying that if I walked right up to the site, I wouldn't be able to see it?
Cloaking technology is not just a science fiction concept. It's been developed for more than 10 years. It's used much more frequently than people realize. And I'm not talking about its diluted version of stealth technology. I'm talking about the ability to superimpose a reality construction over an existing reality that's desired to be hidden. For instance, you could walk right up to the entrance of the ancient Arrow site and see nothing that would look like an entrance or opening. to the observer it would be a flat wall of rock. And it would have all the characteristics of rock texture, hardness and so forth, but it's actually a reality construction that is superimposed on the mind of the observer. In reality the entrance is there, but it can't be observed because the mind has been duped into the projected reality construction.
Great, so there's no way to enter this site and experience this time capsule. So once again, us little humans are prevented from the experience of proof. You see, the reason why this is so hard to believe is that nothing is ever proven.
But isn't proof in the eye of the beholder? In other words, what is proof for you may not convince another or vice versa. Isn't this the way of all religions and even science? Scientists claim to have proof of this theory or that theory, and then some years later, another scientist comes along and disproves the previously held theory. And on this goes.
So what's your point?
Proof is not absolute. It's not even objective. And what you're looking for is an experience that is permanent and perfect in its expression of truth. And such an experience, if it indeed exists, is not owned or possessed by any secret network or elitist organization or galactic federation for that matter. You could have this experience of absolute proof tomorrow, and the very next day, doubt would begin to creep in, and in a matter of weeks or months this proof, or absolute truth, that you aspire to possess, it would be just a memory. And probably not even a powerful memory because so much doubt would be infused into it. No, I can't give you or anyone absolute proof. I can only tell you what I know to be true for me and try to share it as accurately as I know how with anyone who's interested. I'm less interested in trying to relate the cosmology of the universe than I am in getting the story of the Wingmakers and the artifacts of their time capsule into the public attention. The public should know about this story. It's a discovery of unparalleled importance and it should be shared.
You do realize, don't you, that you've made me the messenger? You've asked me to be the one who takes the public scrutiny and suspicions, and has to endure all of the ridicule.
I'm not asking you to do anything against your will, Sarah. If you never do anything with the materials I've given you, I'd understand. All I'd ask is that you return them to me if you're not going to get them out. If I step forward as the messenger, I would lose my freedom. If you step forward, this story could catapult your career and you're only doing your job. You're not the messenger, you're the transmitter. The media. But you must do what you think best. And I'd understand your decision whatever you decide.
Okay, let's wrap it up there. I don't want you to get the wrong impression that I'm a total disbeliever. But I'm a journalist and it's my responsibility to validate and cross-check stories before I publish them. And with you, I can't do this. And what you're telling me, if it's true, is the biggest story ever to be told. But I can't take this to the media, at least not the company I work for, because they would never publish it. No validation. No story.
Yes, I understand. But I've shown you some of the ASIO technologies and photos of the site and its contents, so these must be some form of validation.
For me, it validates that something is going on that I've never heard about. Namely, the ASIO is a new organization that's never been talked about, at least not in my journalistic circles. But your photographs and stories don't validate what you've explained tonight. They're in the category of teasers. Something the National Enquirer is fond of broadcasting. But this isn't the brand of journalism I subscribe to.
Let's talk some more in the next few days. Take the time to read some of the materials translated from the optical disc, and in the meantime, just be neutral. Okay?
Don't assume I'm not interested, or too much a skeptic to do anything with this stuff. I just need some time to get my bearings as to what I should do with this story and the evidence you've provided.
I promised you several interviews before I left. Are we still on for tomorrow night?
Yes. But how much more is there than what you've already explained?
We've only touched on the surface of a small portion of the story.
That's a little hard to believe, but let's pick up tomorrow night, then.
Thanks for your interest in my story, Sarah. I know it sounds outlandish, but at least you've shown restraint in writing me off as a lunatic. And for that, you have my thanks.
You're very welcome. End of a session 1.